All right, did you miss me? I love a warm welcome. My name is Alyssa Stone. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Community Engagement here at the Mechanics Institute, and we are really excited to welcome you to our CinemaLit Special Event, The Shining, from source to screen and stage, with two extra special guests this evening, Simone Chavoor from ABC and Daniel Harvey from Parallèle, and I will introduce both of them in just a moment. Since I do see quite a few new faces here this evening, who is here for the very first time? Wonderful, welcome. We are so excited to have some new people here at the Mechanics Institute. For those who aren't as familiar with our organization, we are a cultural center, library, world-renowned chess program, and events center founded in 1854. So we're a very old nonprofit. This building that we're in was developed in 1910 after the 1906 earthquake. And if you haven't had a chance to check out other floors of the building, I highly recommend on your way out taking the world-famous spiral staircase down from where we are, the fourth floor, all the way back down to the lobby and peeking in the beautiful library. It's a really stunning space, so I highly recommend checking out other parts of the building. Since we do have some newbies here tonight, the men's restroom is through the chess room to the left, and the women's restroom is across from the bank of elevators. You are welcome to grab a snack, use the restroom, take care of whatever needs you have throughout the evening. A little bit different for us here at CinemaLit, we are doing our presentation and discussion first, and then our movie screening second. So we're going to have Simone and Daniel both present on The Shining and its adaptations. We'll do Q&A before we do the screening of the film beginning at about 7 p.m. So buckle up for a Friday night fright late night. I'm now very excited to welcome first Simone Chavoor and second Daniel Harvey. Simone Chavoor is a Bay Area native who, like any good film graduate student, did her time in Los Angeles working in the film and television industry before moving back to her beloved home, the Bay Area. An action and horror film obsessive, Simone hosted Die Hard with a podcast and currently co-hosts the more diabolical Black Mass Appeal podcast. She is the unit coordinator for ABC7's KGO 7 on Your Side team and has an Emmy for her research in the consumer or business category. While not working, Simone enjoys playing bass, guitar, relaxing with her partner and their 3 cats, and competing on her bar trivia team. She was on Jeopardy in 2015. Simone likes to say it went okay. Having watched it a couple times, I think she did fantastically. Daniel Harvey is an experienced creative professional with 13 plus years of experience in artistic, administrative, and production roles across the creative sector. Currently, as artistic and community manager for Parallèle in San Francisco, he works as a key member of the artistic team, producing all of the company's main stage productions, as well as overseeing all community programming and partnerships. Daniel is a graduate of the Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne, Australia, and moved to San Francisco in 2017. In the Bay Area, Daniel has also previously worked as a program director for Intersection for the Arts and served on the board for contemporary dance program Levy Dance. His costume designs can also be seen occasionally on stages around San Francisco. We are very excited to welcome both Simone and Daniel. We'll have Simone come on up first, followed by Daniel, and then we will do Q&A before the film screening. Please give a warm welcome to Simone.
Hello. There we go. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, I want to thank Alyssa for asking me to do this. I think she knows that I will take any opportunity to talk about my favorite films, especially to a captive audience. So, yes, so The Shining is one of my favorite movies. I have been obsessed for decades. This is my very beaten up copy of the paperback that I've had for a very long time. And then you can also see its influence, some of my fashion choices, home decor, tattoos, and vacation plans. So it's fun. My friend Daniel's here today, and he asked me why I wasn't wearing one of these dresses, and I said I just didn't feel like wearing a dress tonight. But I've got the scarf, I've got the Room 237 necklace on, so. So even though it is one of my favorite films, I cannot remember the first time that I watched it. It was just one of those films that was always around. But I remember finally declaring that it was one of my favorite horror films while I was in college. That's when I started to really lean into my horror affection. Now, so I am a big fan of Stephen King's work. Obviously, I've read this particular book many times. I've read many of his other books. But I will admit up front that I like the movie better than I like the book. So just keep that in mind. I have a bias. But the question is why? Why do I prefer the movie? Now, it is, I'm a movie person, although I also am a big reader. I think that the movie captures the imagination better for me, speaking for myself. And it's about mood and ambiguity that the book gives you lots of information, lots of backstory, but the movie lets you fill in some blanks yourself. And I think that's more interesting, more engaging, and more scary. So, King's work is amazing, and it's very, very personal to him. It tells a story of addiction that resonates with many, many people. I know plenty of people who prefer the book over the movie, but, differences between folks. I like to think about one of my favorite horror books, which is Shirley Jackson's The House on Haunted Hill. It has a scene where the characters go on a picnic and they're chased by something. We never find out. But it's so scary because we don't find out. And I feel like that's sort of where the movie goes. Oh, I'm blocking my own face. So, I do think that if the film was less ambiguous and less open to interpretation, we might not be talking about it as much as we do today. So, in the 90s, Stephen King, who famously did not like the movie, we'll get into that, he helped to executive produce and write a TV miniseries of The Shining that was much more faithful to his work. And it's kind of lost in time because it didn't do that well. And obviously people are not talking about that miniseries in the same way that they do Kubrick's film today. So ultimately, I think it's best to consider each as exemplars of their own medium, the book and the movie. A literal adaptation of the book might not work as a movie, and the movie is not going to tell the complete story that the novel tells. So I think that when we talk about the differences between the book and the movie, we have to think about why those decisions were made, how does it, speak to the medium that it was being created for, and how does it make it work better for that medium. So we're going to go into the differences between the book and the movie with characters and setting and a little bit of plot. How many people have seen The Shining before? Okay, so most people. There will be spoilers. I'm sorry for the new folks. But it's kind of hard to discuss the full adaptation without getting into some of those details. So, and then after we discuss the differences between the book and the movie, we're going to talk about why Kubrick made those choices and also how Stephen King reacted to them. All right, so the first character we have here is Jack Torrance. Now, Jack, in both versions, is a writer and a former teacher, and he's a sober alcoholic who once broke his son Danny's arm while drunk, although in the movie it's dislocated his shoulder. And he also tries to kill his family under the influence of the hotel. So that's for both of them. Now, for the book version, King saw himself as, Jack analog, and he's a much more relatable everyman who does love his family. He talks, we get to see Jack's actions in terms of like loving his wife, caring about his son, and really trying to do the best that he can for them. Now, he is an alcoholic who's in recovery. In the book, he's been sober for 14 months. But we get a lot more information about his experiences with alcoholism in the book, because obviously we could hear his inner monologue. So we get information like his abusive father, which is part of why he started to drink. We get information about his role as a teacher and how he's dismissed from that role after an incident with a student. And we also learn about his friend Al Shockley, who is his drinking buddy, until one day they have a weird encounter where they run over a bicycle on the road after a bender, but there's nobody there. And it's the thing that shocks them into stopping drinking. Interestingly, it's not him breaking his son's arm. I'm gonna grab my water. And so when we get into the plot, at the very end of the book, even though Jack has been possessed by the spirit of the hotel, he's able to regain control of himself long enough to prevent himself from fully killing his family, and he does die at the end. Now, moving on to movie Jack. Jack Nicholson looks hella crazy. And Stephen King did not like that. He felt that it kind of gave it away that he's not an everyman at the beginning. He looks nuts to begin with. So when he descends into madness, it's not a long slide, you know? So his past is barely alluded to. He mentions a little bit at the beginning that he's a former teacher, but no information on why. It's former. And, his past with his father is never mentioned. Now, because Jack Nicholson does a very, very good job at looking like a crazy guy, the hotel's effects are harder to discern. Now, in the book, we have someone who's like loving his family, struggling with his sobriety, and then as we get to hear his inner thoughts, have that back and forth between, good Jack, family Jack, and possessed alcoholic Jack. In the movie, not as much. And at the end of the film, he's fully possessed by the hotel. He never regains his own control, and he ends up dying, freezing in the hedge maze.
Spoiler alert.
I said we're gonna have spoilers. I said it. Okay, so moving on to Wendy. So in both, Wendy is a homemaker who loves but is scared of her son Danny, and loves but is confused and also sort of scared by her husband Jack. And she does survive this episode at the Overlook Hotel in both versions. Now, in the book version, she's kind of more like a cheerleader type. Blonde hair, good legs, which is mentioned a couple of times, gorgeous. Yeah. And she's also a bit more strong as a character. She considers her options at every step of the way in terms of protecting herself from Danny. She considers divorcing Jack even before they get to the hotel because of their marital issues. She, thinks more early and distinctly about leaving the hotel and leaving Jack behind. But we also get into her history with her emotionally abusive mother, who used Wendy as a pawn between her and her father, which kind of factors into how Wendy is as a mom because she doesn't want to turn into the same thing with her son, Danny. Now in the movie, we have Shelly Duvall, who I think is absolutely gorgeous, but clearly a different look. We've got the dark hair. And then her actions throughout the movie, so she appears more meek and timid. And, some people have criticized her acting job in this film. I disagree with that because I feel like, especially as we get towards the end of the film, she's acting a little hysterical, to use that misogynist term. But the way I think about it is, if you have been up awake for hours or like days with your husband going crazy, your son is acting strange, and you are just at your wit's end, you might be acting the same way too. Like I have been that tired after a day of work where I want to burst into tears, let alone being in a haunted hotel. In the movie, we get absolutely no information about her past, so we don't have that to inform us about her decisions. And she's also kind of in denial about what's happening at the hotel and with Danny's powers. And we'll get into that when we talk about Danny next. So Danny, in both the movie and the book, is nicknamed Doc, and he has strong, like, psychic and telekinetic, well, not telekinetic, but just psychic powers that Dick Halloran calls the Shining. He can see the past, the future, and read people's thoughts in the present to varying degrees of clarity. Sometimes it's just impressions, sometimes you can actually hear their words. And he also does survive his time at the Overlook. Now, Book Danny is a little bit more attuned to his parents' marital problems, and he constantly worries that his parents are going to divorce. That's something that he can read in their minds, and it scares him almost more than anything. Now, in the book, he is a daddy's boy. He loves his father. He loves his mother, but he's a daddy's boy, and he wants to make his dad proud and wants to spend all of his time with his dad, which makes the events of the hotel even more difficult for him to bear. Book Danny is more in control of his shining powers. He can call up this character of Tony at will, again, to varying degrees of success. And we do learn more about this Tony figure. So he refers to Tony in a way that makes his parents think that he's an imaginary friend. And that's kind of both in the book and the movie. But we learn, or at least we can piece together, that Tony is Danny, older. Danny's full name is Danny Anthony Torrance. Tony is the name of his imaginary friend who shows him things, shows him visions of what's to come, what might happen. And to that effect, in the fact that he has more control over his powers, when things start to go poorly at the hotel, to say, to put it mildly, he consciously calls to Dick Halloran to come help them. Now, in the movie, Danny is played by Danny Lloyd. This is pretty much his only acting role. He's kind of a weird kid. He's very quiet. He's distant from both of his parents, but even more so his father. He spends more time with his mother. His powers are more subconscious, and he doesn't seem to be able to control them as well. He can't call Tony at will necessarily. He can't project his thoughts. So when he calls to Halloran for help, it seems to be more of like just the extremity of the circumstances. So again, with Tony is kind of seen as an imaginary friend by his parents in the film. They kind of, play it off as, oh, what did Tony say today? But in the book, like, Wendy actually takes Tony seriously. At one point asks Danny to read his father to sort of see what's going on with him. Meanwhile, in the movie, at one point, Tony sort of takes over Danny and talks to his mother through Danny because things have gotten so bad. All right, so moving on to the setting. So The Shining was inspired by Stephen King staying at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. I have been there, that is my picture. I've been to all of these except for the Timberline Lodge, which we'll talk about in just a second. So King stayed there one winter, and he stayed in room 217. And so it inspired this idea of a luxury hotel in the Colorado mountains that closes every winter. Obviously, the Stanley does not close every winter, but it's quite cold and quite snowy. Now, the next one is the Timberline Lodge in Oregon. This is where they shot the exteriors, and pretty much it. They shot the exteriors there, but the interiors were all shot on in a studio in England. Kubrick actually never left England when he was shooting The Shining. He sent a second unit out to shoot all the exteriors, there when he shot the interiors himself. Now the Awani, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. That was my favorite to visit because the interiors are almost identical to the interiors of the Overlook. The same, the Colorado Lounge in the film is basically the same as the lounge in the Awani. Okay, so room 217 versus room 237. I have heard that both the Timberline and the Stanley asked Kubrick to change the number of the room to 237 to not impact their business of their own hotels. I believe it's the Stanley, but I've heard both. So out of respect for those wishes, Kubrick changed it to room 237 because that room number did not exist at the Stanley. Okay. And so the hedge animals versus the hedge maze. So the hedge animals are in the book. There's topiaries. I think there's a dog, there's 2 lions, a rabbit, a buffalo, and I think that's it. These come alive as the hotel starts to gain more power. Meanwhile, in the movie, we have the hedge maze instead. Now, the reason for that change is that Kubrick thought that topiary animals might be too goofy and cute, but he always liked the idea of a maze. So I tend to agree. Now, here are the ghosts. We get the ghosts in both the book and the movie, but we get details about the ghosts from the book in great detail. Because most of these are people who stayed at the hotel, worked at the hotel, owned the hotel, and we get their stories and their names. In the movie, we just see them. And again, that's another thing that I think is much more interesting. Like, I watched the movie before I read the book, so I'm like, why is this lady in the bathtub? Well, in the book, she's a former guest who had committed suicide while she was there. Why is this guy in a crazy dog suit? Well, during the Overlook's heydays in the 20s, there was a costume party where he dressed up as a dog and his lover humiliated him in front of everybody, and then he subsequently died. A couple other things to point out. So in the movie, we have mention of Brady. Brady, the former caretaker, the one who killed himself and his family, including the twin girls. But in the movie, he's referred to both as Charles and Delbert Brady, and I could not find a reason for that change. I don't know if it was a mistake, if there's some sort of purpose behind it, who knows. Sort of similarly, both these ghosts are identified as Horace Derwent, one of the former owners of the hotel, but as you can see, they're played by different characters in different scenarios. Again, not sure why. We also have Lloyd the bartender, who makes appearances in both the book and the movie, although much more prominent in the movie. And the Grady twins, who in the book are not twins at all. They are sisters who are a couple of years apart. They don't have names, but Kubrick decided to give their characters names for some reason. And now we get to the boiler. The boiler plays a huge role in the book. It finishes the book, if you catch my drift. Look at this picture. It is barely mentioned in the movie. We actually only see Wendy attending to it. It's a really big part of Jack's duties is to dump the boiler, which is accumulating pressure, multiple times a day. In the book, as he goes, more and more mad, he starts to forget, and that leads to the ultimate destruction of himself and the hotel. Now, these are just a couple of miscellaneous pieces that I thought were interesting. So in the book, instead of the axe, they use a roque mallet. I actually am not quite sure. It's similar to croquet. And you can see this is from the 1997 Shining miniseries, which again is more accurate to the book. Stephen Weber looking a mess. We also have this fire hose recurs as something that Danny sees in the hotel's halls that terrifies him and comes to life and attacks him in some of the final scenes. The wasps is also kind of a recurring motif in the book. Jack, in his repairs of the hotel, unearths a wasp's nest that attacks him. He kills all the bugs with a bug bomb, gives his son the nest, thinking that they're all, taken care of. But they are not, and they attack Danny, and further sort of stresses out Danny and his mother, and kind of indicates of the escalating spooky violence of the hotel. The scrapbook is very important in the book. Now, Jack becomes more and more obsessed with the history of the hotel and decides to undertake writing a history of the book. In both the book and the movie, he says that he's looking forward to getting some writing done during his time at the Overlook. In the book, he's working on a play that heavily references his own time as a teacher. In the movie, it's never clear what he's working on. And we never get this scrapbook. And in the book, the scrapbook is found in the basement, and it's all these articles about the sordid history of the hotel that, as Jack reads more, becomes more obsessed and more in the thrall of the hotel. In the movie, we only see it as a very quick glance next to him as he's writing. In the movie, instead of the rogue mallet, he's got the axe, very famously. The elevator is movie-only construction, as is the all work and no play make Jack a dull boy. Okay, so Kubrick on King. These two guys did not like each other very much. Kubrick refused to read King's version of the script that he had written. But interestingly, I have a quote here that says that Kubrick also thought that King's script adaptation was too literal, although how would he know that if he didn't read it? So that's some conflicting information there. Now, Kubrick also did not want to emphasize the ghosts in the hotel because he himself did not believe in an afterlife. He was really interested in making a horror film, even though he didn't believe in ghosts. When the book was offered to him by Warner Brothers, he said, well, all right, it might be challenging to do this, but I must have the freedom to change whatever I like. And he sure did. So Stephen King was fine with that at the time because it was obviously a prerequisite for him getting to make the film. But, we'll hear King's reaction in a second. So again, referring to some of the reasons why some of the changes were made, like Diane Johnson was his co-screenwriter, and she said that they changed the ending from the book almost entirely because Kubrick just found it a cliche to blow everything up at the end, which I actually agree. He thought it might be more interesting to have more of a metaphorical death at the end. And again, talking about when you adapt a book to a movie, books are so much longer than a movie. Movie scripts tend to be about 120 pages. This is considerably more than that. So they really had to pare it down. And then also in the book, nobody gets killed except for Jack. Dick Halloran does get killed in the movie. But Kubrick really thought that somebody needed to die because it was a horror movie. So there you go. And then finally, according to Diane Johnson, it was Danny's relationship with his father that was the thing that really interested Kubrick the most. So he was emotionally involved with the point of view of a little boy who was afraid of his father. And, it's interesting because you hear about Kubrick's treatment of the actors in his films. Famously, Shelly Duvall had to endure like 127 takes of the scene that takes place on the staircase and basically drove her to a nervous breakdown. He was not a nice guy. But when he was working with Danny Lloyd, it was very important to him to protect him from the fact that he was in a horror movie. He, tried to play it off as like it's more of a comedy. Danny Lloyd didn't really have context for the scenes that he was acting in, so it kind of helped him from, help him not get scared while he was filming. I kind of tried to pick something close to like the 80s for this King picture, and that looks a little goofier than I expected, but yeah. If anyone's seen the movie Creepshow, that's when King looks really, really goofy in his little role that he has there. So in his 1981 nonfiction book, Danse Macabre, King called Kubrick's The Shining maddening, perverse, and a disappointing film. But it retained a brilliance that is inarguable. Now, King's major contention with Kubrick's adaptation was the kind of the excising of the alcoholism as a main theme. And we do get it in the movie, but it's not nearly as prominent as it is in the book. Now, of course, King was struggling with alcoholism and other addictions himself, so that's why it's very personal to him. Stephen King had been quite open with his struggles of alcoholism and addiction, and it's no secret that portions of The Shining and the character of Jack Torrance are based on his own experiences and fears. He was deeply afraid that his own demons would cause his family unit to break apart, or worse, he'd somehow hurt the ones he loved the most in the process. The novel, therefore, has a tremendously grounded and pained family dynamic at its core. In many ways, it's an exploration of the author's own psyche and behaviors. That's a quote from the Audible blog on the book. So King disliked the movie so much that yes, he executive produced and wrote every screenplay for a 1997 miniseries adaptation. It stars Steven Weber and Rebecca De Mornay. I think it's worth a watch, but one watch. So when you go to the Stanley Hotel, they're very proud of the fact that the miniseries was actually filmed there. And if you turn on the television in the room, there's one channel that has it playing constantly on it. Which is too bad because it's not the version that I like. So some other issues that King had with Kubrick's version was Duvall's characterization of Wendy. He said that it was the most misogynist character ever put on film. And again, I can see that. I can see how this, on the surface level, you would assume that Wendy is weak because she's crying, she's, like I said, quote unquote hysterical. But I feel like that's actually a really grounded performance. And it really emphasizes the heightened emotions around everything that's happening. So the other thing that King disagreed with, but I alluded to before, is Kubrick's casting of Jack Nicholson. So King said, Jack Nicholson, though a fine actor, was all wrong for the part. His last role had been in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and between that and The Manic Grin, the audience automatically identified him as a loony from the first scene. But the book is about Jack Torrance's gradual descent into madness throughout the malign influence of the Overlook. If the guy is nuts to begin with, then the entire tragedy of his downfall is wasted. So, legitimate criticisms from the creator, and he's a creator, I'm not going to argue with him on his opinion of the thing. But like I said, I actually do still prefer the movie. I feel that the book over-explains some things, and I feel like when you're working with horror, it's the imagination and the unknown that makes it more effective, especially as a film. So these are some things to kind of keep in mind when we watch the screening later, and thank you very much.
Right. All right. Hi, everyone. So as Alyssa said, my name is Daniel Harvey. I'm the Artistic and Community Manager for Opera Parallèle, and it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. So I'm firstly, those of you who are new to Opera Parallèle or have never heard about us, we are a contemporary performance company based here in San Francisco, and we're all about telling relevant and engaging stories through music and through opera. So we're presenting The Shining, the operatic adaptation of The Shining. A week from today, we open at the Overlook Center for the Arts. So The Shining is this is the opera version. It was originally presented in 2016 at the Minnesota Opera, and we're very happy and very proud to be producing the second production of the opera here in San Francisco. So I'm here to represent the amazing creative team and creators of this opera. I am very fortunate and very lucky that I get to work with a lot of amazing creative people. So I'm going to show you some of their work and let them also some videos of them and let them talk for themselves. Much better to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, rather than from me. I'll be telling you a little bit about the opera and as well as some of the differences between the movie and the book, which the book is very much the basis of the opera rather than the film. So The Shining opera is of course based on the 1977 novel by Stephen King. And as I said, it was originally premiered and commissioned by the Minnesota Opera in 2016, or actually sold out its run before it even opened, which for contemporary opera is pretty remarkable. And it's since enjoyed sellout houses in Colorado. Of course, they did the Colorado Opera did it, and Kansas City. Opera Parallèle, as I said, is very proud to create the new production. It's a co-production with the Hawaii Opera Theatre and Portland Opera. So, why would you make an opera about The Shining? Feels like a very relevant question. Oops, the next slide. Beautiful ladder. But very conveniently, I had a conversation with Paul Moravec and Mark Campbell, who are the composer and librettist of the opera. I had a Zoom conversation a few weeks ago, and I asked them this very question. So I'm going to play their answer rather than just letting me talk about it. This story made for the opera.
Oh, come on, it has everything. Unfortunately, I think most people look at this Shining and then think of the Stanley Kubrick movie. And I love the Stanley Kubrick movie. I really do. I'm a huge fan of Kubrick's movie, especially Barry Lyndon, which no one is a fan of. I love his movies, but it's not the story. And when you read the novel, there are so many elements that are just classic opera. Starting with the main character, Jack Torrance, who is really trying to be a good man. You don't know that from the movie. When you see Jack Nicholson in the movie, you're going, okay, he's going to murder his family. And there's no opera there, there's no story there. But when you read the novel, it is just a classic story for opera. And it has this other, element of it, of paranormal events and everything. The thing that was difficult for me was taking this 600-page novel and finding the events that are essential and making sure that I keep my libretto as narrow as possible, as short as possible, so that Paul could expand it with his brilliant music. But it's kind of it's funny because when I would tell people that I'm doing an operatic adaptation of The Shining, they would laugh and they would start doing imitations of Jack Nicholson, and I'd say, well, it's really not that. And I suggest you read the novel because Stephen King is a brilliant storyteller and one that is perfect for operatic adaptation.
Absolutely. Paul, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, it's about extreme emotion as well. It's about love, death, and power on steroids. The big question for the creators of an opera is, why are these people singing? Because it's essentially an irrational art form. And it's because of overpowering emotions that give rise to song. And this story has that on steroids. Stephen King's story, that's the original story.
Well, why does this story make good opera? So as Paul and Mark said here, music and opera is an abstract and irrational art form in many ways. That's kind of why I love it. But I love great theatre too. But of course, when you layer in the emotional power of music, that's hard to beat. In a story, Mark also said in this conversation, a story like this that deals with subject matter of mental instability and violence and all of the themes of The Shining, it's very hard to portray that with words alone. The power of music and song allows you to take that to a whole other place and tell a whole other part of that story in a different way that you wouldn't be able to do just through words. And so as Paul mentioned, love, death, and power on steroids, that's how he thinks about this opera. And really that's kind of the basis of a lot of opera, to be honest. But of course it's very prominent in The Shining. And Mark also said in this conversation that the opera ends actually on a hopeful note, which is, again, not necessarily something you would associate with The Shining, but it does, and it actually ends that in an amazing way. It actually just came from rehearsal. We did a final room run this afternoon with the cast and got to see the whole thing the whole way through, and it really does take you on this pretty amazing, powerful journey. And there is this sort of catharsis and hope at the end, which doesn't necessarily, you don't get that in the film, but it is very much in the book and in the opera. And it's bouncing a little bit off what Simone said. I think any sort of adaptation process, depending on the medium for which you're adapting, that you always have to go through that process of figuring out what is essential to the story in the way that you're going to tell it. So Simone said that a screenplay is normally 120 pages. An opera libretto is, I think this one is about 70 pages. So going from a 600-page book to a 70-page libretto, narrowing that down, figuring out how to tell that whole story, shifting time frame a little bit, timeline a little bit, and there are a number of things that are also didn't make it into the opera that are in the book, but the dog character does make it into the opera. I remembered that today when I was watching the run. And yeah, a few other things like that. There are things like the Danny's imaginary friend Tony, who's not in the opera, things that don't really translate so well to stage, or are much harder to translate to stage. Obviously, we don't include them because they don't service the story as well. So we also don't have the topiary animals or the hedge maze, of course, because that's only in the film. But yeah, obviously we're not going to try to recreate animated topiary animals on stage. maybe the arena spectacular version or something. So I'm going to play a few little musical excerpts from the opera to give you a sense of how the musical storytelling of Paul Moravec translates parts of the story of The Shining into music. So there's a number of these interludes in the opera, orchestral interludes. There's no singing, it's just some staging happening. And they mostly tell part of the story of Danny discovering room 217 at the Overlook. So I'm going to play the first one. I'm going to tell you what's happening on stage. And then I'm going to play the second one and we'll see what you think is going to be happening on stage during that one. Sorry. Okay. This is interlude 2. So during this interlude, things are still normal at the hotel. Jack is working on his typewriter, Wendy's knitting, and Danny is wandering around the hotel. He walks by room 217 and pauses. You will notice a change in the mood and the music halfway through with the appearance of the harp in the orchestra, because we don't know it yet, but something is wrong about room 217, and Danny knows it. That's the first one. Then this is interlude 4, which happens, there's another one in between, and then a couple of scenes later, all in Act 1 of the opera. So I'm going to play this one, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts about what happens here. thoughts on the musical interpretation?
Red Rum.
It's not quite the Red Rum scene. That is, no, it is one of the ghosts. Yes, Mrs. Massey. Yeah, so it's the moment when Danny finally, he comes to the room, he's found the key for the room this time, and he finally enters room 217 and discovers Mrs. Massey in the bathtub, and who proceeds to attack him. But it's one of the sort of few sort of almost jump scare kind of moments in the opera, but it's that powerful, imagine it with a full orchestra playing that live, that powerful orchestral moment. You get that when we see Mrs. Massey for the first time. And I'll show you in a moment some of the designs for that character. So it's pretty amazing scene. Even just in the rehearsal today, without any of the costumes or sets or anything, it's gonna be great. So that's just a little example of how opera takes storytelling further through music, and how a composer can tell you a whole story and a whole moment in a story without any words, but really sort of enhances the emotion and the sort of drama behind that moment just through music. Now, there is actually some science behind this. I'm not a scientist, but it's not just about the feelings and the emotions. But I happened to have a great conversation just last week with an amazing neuroscientist about why music is such a powerful drug for humans. So I'm going to play a little clip from the conversation that we had last week with at the Academy in the Castro with an amazing person named Indra Viscontis, who's a neuroscientist / stage director and singer, and she studies the intersection of music and the creative brain.
Actually, a little secret that some neuroscientists still can't let go of, which is there's no such thing as a reptilian brain. This idea that our emotions are primitive and somehow our rational minds are more evolved is total bullshit. Because our emotions are highly constructed, they are highly evolved, they are multiply represented in many different brain networks. I mean, and this is actually one of the reasons why we find horror so fun. Why we actually seek out fear is because we can control our emotional reaction to that fear by changing how we interpret the context. Because if you were actually in a hotel and someone was giving an axe to the door, it would not be fun. But you know you are not there, you are in an opera house or in a theater. And so you can enjoy this nervous system reaction and know you are safe. And when you think about what that nervous system reaction is, it's the same series of hormones and neurotransmitters and heart, physiological changes, heart racing, etc., that we get when we fall in love, that we get excited about things. And it's actually, it's how you label the feeling that can turn it from fear to excitement.
Sorry, you'll hear the sound a couple times, because these videos were made for like social media and things, so use those clips. So my interpretation or my takeaway from that is that coming to see The Shining, the opera, is just like falling in love. It's the same emotion, same hormones and all of that. So yeah, come along and you'll fall in love with opera, I promise. So I want to now show you a few of the visuals from our production. So one of the challenges, of course, for any team, for our team and for any team taking on this opera, is that the visuals of Kubrick's interpretation of the film are so famous and so amazingly beautiful. His design team created such iconic images and the patterns and the designs that Simone loves, and of course all the visuals of the hotel, the interiors and stuff are incredible. So it's a challenge for any creative team for a stage production to figure out how to create their own take on that, how to put their own spin on such an iconic sort of style. So our creative director and stage director Brian Sharpenbill approached this in a way that his approach is to highlight the inherent dichotomy, as he calls it, between two philosophical and corresponding aesthetics that The Shining leans into, those being naturalism and surrealism. So I'm going to let the designers speak for themselves. they're much better at speaking about it than I am. Okay. So first up, we have our amazing costume designer, Alina Boko-Bikova, and here you'll see a little bit about the inspirations for her costume designs. You get a sneak peek at the Grady girls, the Grady twins, which I believe in the book, is this correct, the sisters in the book, rather than twins? Yeah, right. And in the film, they made them actual twins. So we kind of landed somewhere in the middle for the opera. They're sisters, but they look very similar. So yeah, this is Alina.
It's such a classic piece. We truly wanted to bring our own understanding of creating the world, which bridges the reality of 1970s and this surreal hotel environment. I was inspired by lots of beautiful, like world famous designers who get inspired by surreal world, starting with Elsa Schiaparelli in 1930s. Of course, it's Balenciaga and Alexander McQueen. So like all of those designers who have inspirations in surrealism are coming together in my creation. The real characters will be rooted in 70s for sure, and that is fun, cheesy, horribly beautiful 70s. Be sure to look at Mrs. Macy's character because it's a surprise because we collaborated with our wig and makeup designer Sharon, who had an idea about incorporating the hair design, this wig, into the part of the costume.
So as you saw at the end there, Beyonce actually copied us for her current tour of the same sort of hand-inspired jumpsuit. Well, it was actually the way they designed it, but we like to think she saw our designs and incorporated them into her current tour. But yeah, as you can see, really leaning into that naturalism world of the 1970s for the alive characters of Denny and Wendy and the family and the staff of the hotel, and then we really lean into the surreal, taking inspiration from the amazing fashion designers that Alina mentioned for the ghosts. Now we're going to hear from Jacqueline Scott, who's our scenic designer. This is Jacqueline Scott, who's our scenic designer, who will talk a little bit about how the character of the Overlook Hotel itself is such an important role in the story.
His Overlook Hotel was very much its own character, and along with the ghosts that inhabit the hotel, it was sort of manipulating the guests to do its bidding. When I was imagining the set for the very first time, like my first impulse was that I really wanted the set to feel alive, almost like it's breathing. I started looking at hotel interiors, in particular lobbies, and especially from the 70s, since we want to sort of place this in that time period. They all have these like really beautiful, rich, sort of golden, warm earth tones that I really was captivated by. That's the whole idea. It's like when you first walk into the hotel, we want it to be warm and inviting. And slowly over time is when it starts to get darker and colder. Be sure to look out for the very first time that Jack goes to investigate strange noises. He's going to step off of caretakers and enter the rest of the hotel, and we're really pushing the envelope when it comes to lights and some screen material and projections, and it's going to be a whole transformation of the space, so look out for that.
So yeah, I'm really excited about the scenic design for this production. Jacqueline's done an incredible job at really enhancing the storytelling through her design. And layered with that, working with our projection designer, David Murakami, who working from the surfaces that Jacqueline's created in the scenic design to really bring them to life through projection. And particularly with things like when The Shining is happening in Danny's Power, The Shining, there's a visual representation of that in the projections, and which I believe he's basing that on patterns from brainwaves and things like that as well, which is really interesting. Yeah, it's definitely worth coming to check out. So I want to play you another little clip, this time with some singing, and it's going to hear actually from our leading lady. Her name is Kirsten Piper Brown. You saw her on the end of the panel in the video before. So in this little clip, she talks about her interest in uncovering the character and her interpretation of Wendy as a character. And she'll also perform a short excerpt from the opera. It's an aria called I Never Stop Loving You, which is from Act 1 of the opera. It's a moment where she sings this to well, it's not technically to Jack, but it's about Jack. And he's in the vicinity when it happens, but yeah.
Really enjoy the journey of the characters, and especially Jack and getting the history, and bringing that into into Wendy's relationship with Jack. That, you know, she's not this, you know, just like subservient woman in the 70s, that she, you know, she has, you know, her own thing going, her own thing going on, but I think that history feeds why she's, that's the thing, you know, as a logical person, I guess, I'm like, why are we here? Why are we still doing this? But I think and this is what I love about the opera, is that we have an opportunity, you have an opportunity to really witness and see and experience the love that is between Wendy and Jack and the whole family, but really see, you know, why Wendy. I think I want to answer that question, and I think that's kind of controversial with all this things, like, why is she here? Why is she doing this?
So as you can see, Wendy in the opera is quite different to the Wendy in the film. I'm not quite sure Shelly Duvall would be saying "I Never Stop Loving You" to Jack Nicholson, but and it's kind of weird hamster pictures in the background. It's just the images that were at the venue. Yeah, I think this is a perfect example of how the this character really has a very different portrayal in the book to the film and now in the opera. You really do see that love between Jack and Wendy, which really makes the violence and the second act issues that arise even more heartbreaking and powerful, because you believe that they're truly in love and that they are this powerful family unit from the beginning. So yeah, I think that's all I have time for. I'm going to wrap it up there. So thank you so much. And Parallèle is performing The Shining at YBCA, the Open Weather Center for the Arts, from June 2nd to 4. I have some postcards here with a little handy discount code. If you'd like to come along, I'd love to see you all there. Welcome to grab one. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one or two very, very fast questions. I don't want to give up some question time. I see one question in the back.
Yeah, quick question for Simone. What is your opinion of the documentary Room 327? What was your?
I knew someone was going to bring that up. I don't want to be a downer. I did not enjoy it. But I think it's because I had different expectations for what it was going to be. I thought it was going to delve into, the film, the making of the film, motifs from the film. Instead, director Rodney Asher interviewed folks who had conspiracy theories around the film. We never see them on camera. We never get their names. We just get to see images from the film and like some other kind of stock footage with people talking about how this is a confession that Stanley Kubrick actually filmed the moon landing. So perhaps if I had known that going in, I would have, been more accepting and interested, but it was not for me.
The whole rabbit hole. Conspiracy world around this story.
Maybe one more very, very fast question.
So, Kubrick being this acclaimed auteur, what made him want to do a horror project to begin with?
I'm actually not sure. I know it was offered to him by Warner Brothers, but being an auteur does not preclude you from doing what are considered genre pieces. I mean, he did 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is hard-ish sci-fi. Historical films, dystopian films with A Clockwork Orange. So I think he was just really open to different things. And he was interested in making a horror film, as I mentioned. That's why he wanted to, have it be scary and have people die, even though he himself did not believe in ghosts or the afterlife.
All right, thank you both, Simone and Daniel, for an incredible overview of The Shining from source to screen and stage. We are going to do our very quick changeover from presentation to film. So we've got about a minute or two until we'll start the movie. If you'd like to take a quick stretch break, grab another drink or a snack, and we will start the film momentarily.